Hey everyone, welcome back to Data and Donuts. My name's Aaron. I'm here with my friend and colleague, Erik Cooper. Today we're going to talk a little bit about predictive analytics in higher education. But before we get to that, Erik, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Erik Cooper, currently the Dean of Planning Research and Resource Development at Sierra College. Before Sierra College, I spent a little time at Yuba College. I've done some statewide committee work, so Common Assessment Initiative, assessment work group, and also currently the RP Group Board President. So been in that role now for 2 years, got two more to go. Super excited to be doing that work as well.
Wow, that's awesome. That's excellent. So we start thinking about predictive analytics and we really think about, how can it really be used? And in your experience, how have you seen it used in higher education?
I don't think we've actually really started using it all that well. It's sort of baseline, I think, assessment, right? We make predictions on students in assessment, and that's really where I think AB 705, for those of you maybe not in California, AB 705 required colleges to use high school transcript information for placement. AB 705 kind of changed what we looked at for predictive analytics, right? Instead of doing an assessment test that then, therefore a student who scored on this should do okay in this coursework. Now we're saying, look, based on a student's past behavior, their past course success, how do we expect them to do, right? So on one level, there's that. But in terms of like what we might think of in terms of like the big data type predictive analytics, I genuinely haven't seen it a ton. I know colleges are experimenting with it. Sierra College, we are experimenting with it a little bit. So I know we'll get into that. But I don't think we've taken advantage of it as part of our toolbox yet in like a big way. I think it does need to be in our toolbox. I think that there are concerns, and rightly so. If anybody has read Weapons of Math Destruction, you're going to kind of know where some of the things that we need to talk about in terms of ethical use of predictive analytics. But it is a good and powerful tool.
Excellent. It really leads into our second question is what are the advantages and disadvantages to predictive analytics and really related to student outcomes?
So let me start with why Sierra College started getting into predictive analytics, because I think this gets to one of the big advantages, right? So I'm going to out our vendor. We work with Starfish. We've got reasons for choosing them, but part of the reason that we chose them is we were using them as an early alert system before they sort of deployed their predictive analytics, right? The challenge with, of course, an early alert system is it's dependent on faculty surveys, right? And like any survey instrument, you're not going to get 100% response rate. So I think we were getting at the time, about 30%. We've upped that based on some other resources we put into it. But that meant 70% of our sections were not getting responses. And I don't remember what the turnout that is in terms of students. But it wasn't soon enough. It was relying too much on people. The predictive analytics side as early alert allows us to get a better sense of who might be a student who might need help. And we can get that at point of application or point of registration, right? Very early in. Now, we know historically, some of our underrepresented groups are going to have some challenges, but it's not every student, right? So we can then get into, if I've got an African-American male student who placed into calculus, I am less concerned about that student than my African-American female who's got childcare issues, right? So we can get a better sense of who's going to have some struggles and where some of those struggles may be. And predictive analytics is going to help us tease that out a little bit earlier in the process. It doesn't replace people. It's just one more tool to help those people make a decision about how can I best help students, or who's the student that needs that help right away.
Excellent, excellent. No, that's a great point, especially when we're trying to siphon through the information, especially when you have so much data coming your way. That tool can really help you just navigate that information and help inform a lot of our decisions and hopefully have more focused efforts for students. And so as we look into it, are there any disadvantages that we may see that are associated with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, real life example from Sierra College, and this is one that kind of got us hung up a little bit. We had an employee whose son and or daughter came back to Sierra College after graduating from a UC. Cool. That's great. That's a student that we would expect to be really highly successful if they're coming back to Sierra College. The Starfish model for predictive analytics predicts basically persistence, right? Are they going to be here in 18 months, and completion? This is a student that already has a bachelor's degree and was coming back for a couple of classes. So when folks were looking at the score for this particular student, right, as a curiosity thing, oh, what does it say for, frankly, my daughter or son? It had a very low success score, right? Because the model is looking at students that are similar to that students who are coming back with a degree already, and saying, yeah, those students typically don't persist. And so people were freaking out that, yeah, the model says the student's not a good student. Well, that's not what the model says. The model's saying the student's not going to persist. And we don't expect that student to, because this is somebody who already has a bachelor's degree. So disadvantage, we don't always as practitioners, don't always understand what the model is actually telling us. And it's easy to jump to, it's a good student, bad student. And that's not what this model's saying. It was specifically persistence. So it's an understanding problem. One other disadvantage, frankly, for I think for us, for community colleges, most of these models were developed under a 4-year model, and they really focus in on a student body that we don't serve. I mean, we know many of our students don't persist. Lots of data sources out for there. That's a different conversation. But what's ended up happening, at least again at Sierra College, when we first deployed this model, many of our students had low persistence markers or low success markers. And so the problem is it sort of compresses the amount of information that we have. So we've worked with Starfish, and we've added in now transfer data, which gives us just a little bit more separation in terms of a success marker, because those are successful students for us, right? So now we've got degrees, certificates, and transfer as part of that success model. And so that's giving us a little bit more spread in terms of the information, and giving us a little bit more wiggle room to really sort of see where problems may lie for particular students or particular student groups.
So that's excellent, especially when you start thinking about what are implications of persistence, completion, transfer to other 2 years. So that's really excellent work. And we've also seen that in a lot of our predictive models to take into account for that is, we want to celebrate those successes, but then also recognize our returning students who are really looking for skill building or looking to advancing it in maybe something that's not even a certificate, but something to help advance their work or just their knowledge in an area. So those are great considerations. But now we want to think about more of like ethical considerations. What should colleges take into account ethically when applying predictive analytics at their school?
So much. So much. It's a tool. I've said that about 50 times now, but tools can be used to harm, and they can be used to help. Again, one of the things that I do appreciate about our vendors' approach is their sort of ethical creed aligns very much to Sierra College's ethical creed. We had a clear plan for what we wanted to do with the data, which was to try to work more with outreach and getting students into programs, so EOPNS, CalWORKs, those sorts of programs, and not using it to exclude, right? This is not about triage in like the medical sense of we only have so many resources to help these students, right? This was about, okay, let's get students in. Let's figure out the resources because we need to help more students. So let's help those more students. Other things about it is, frankly, on the faculty side a little bit. I mean, as you get into some of this, especially if you're developing your own models of predictive analytics, what do you want to include in, your analysis? Let's talk about a third rail. We've got incredible discrepancy, or maybe not discrepancy. We've got quite a bit of variability in student performance based on faculty member, right? And that becomes challenging when we're talking about predictive analytics because that is a factor that becomes very uncomfortable to include in a model. Most of the time, our models look strictly at the student, right? What are the characteristics of the student? But let's also talk about the characteristics of the coursework. And that becomes a very, very scary conversation. And I think, in an ethical way, we don't want to punish faculty for this. We do want to have conversations about curriculum and pedagogy and evaluation and assessment. But that still is, sort of that ethical conversation about how are you going to use it. And again, tying back to weapons of math destruction, I mean, one of the examples that the author uses in that book is how teachers, K-12 teachers, literally lost their jobs because their students didn't do all that well on a standardized test. But it's a really small sample size. The model that was used was opaque. All things that are sort of big negatives that exist in predictive analytics. So on the positive side, I think, of the ethical consideration is, figuring out how you're going to use it first, agreeing to those things ahead of time, making sure people understand the model. I know that not everybody's going to understand the math, right? But if we're talking about like, hey, this is how a decision tree works, roughly speaking, so people can understand what it's doing, and being really clear, again, just how is it going to be used? I think those are all things that have to be considered in terms of the ethical adoption of predictive analytics.
I think that's a perfect presentation of that, especially when taking into account not just student characteristics, but what's happening in the courses, the classes, and there's a variety of different variables that we can put into there. So thank you for pointing that out, and definitely something to consider when looking to adopt and adapt these tools at your institution. And so coming to our bonus questions, so we wouldn't call it Data and Donuts without questions about the name. So the first question I have is, I've heard like 3 or 4 different ways to say data. So I've heard data, data. What do you say?
I'm a data person.
Okay.
I mean, I get the argument for data. Fine, it's data because it comes from datum. So just going there.
Thank you for the clarification. So far it's been 100% at this point, data. So there we go. And so bonus question number 2, probably the most intriguing question of the day. What's your favorite donut?
Apple fritter.
Wow, excellent. That's the first on that one. So definitely, did they have those at Dunkin' Donuts?
They do, and I'm sorry, Duncan, at least in the city of Rockland, you do not have the best apple fritters in the city of Rockland. I won't do a shameless plug for our local donut shop who does a really good apple fritter, but if you're in Rockland and you want to know, give me an email, give me a call. I will tell you where to get the best apple fritter.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for hanging out today and for chatting about predictive analytics. I look forward for us to our further conversations on accreditation and a few other topics that you and I will be discussing.
Yeah, so looking forward to it.
Have a great rest of your day. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Aaron.